Thank you guys for tuning in. I really appreciate it. It's a DeFi Recode episode 5 here. We've got 1dullgeek as a guest today. It's a special day. 1dullgeek is the one who introduced me into Bitcoin and getting back into cryptocurrency. It's his birthday. I'm happy to have him back on the stream and excited to kind of discuss what's going on in Bitcoin and everything that's been happening recently again. And wish him a happy birthday. And I'll let him give a quick introduction to those who missed the first podcast.
So I guess I would say I'm just a guy. I like Bitcoin. I like Bitcoin only. And Rand and I have been talking about Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies for a little bit here, and he suggested we come on and let me share my opinion on the relative merits of Bitcoin versus other cryptocurrencies. So I thought, okay, sure, happy to do it.
Let's have some fun, man. I'm
Yeah.
interested in, like, we've discussed, like, on Twitter and stuff, you've always said, like, have a good foundation, and there's so much happening in DeFi on Ethereum.
Mhm.
And like one of my main questions I was just interested in learning from you is like about this Lightning Network and everything being built on Bitcoin. And do you think that what we're seeing in DeFi will be built on Bitcoin in the future?
So the main premise that I have about DeFi is that DeFi isn't decentralized finance if it's on a centralized coin. And Ethereum has centralization problems. Um, Specifically, it's too tied to some organization called Infura, and too many nodes run on AWS, and the actual amount of effort it takes to spin up a completely fully validating node is incredibly high. And the reason that's important is because in a blockchain area, the thing that provides the validity of the network, the thing that determines whether or not the network is following the rules, is the nodes. The hashing, the production of blocks, that's a service. That's a service to the network. The Bitcoin network is in Bitcoin's case, the Bitcoin network is defined by the Bitcoin nodes that enforce the rules. And there's too few fully validating, fully validated nodes in the Ethereum world. There's just not enough. Now there are all kinds of tens of thousands of sort of non-validating nodes, where they go up to a checkpoint. They trust everything up to that checkpoint and then validate beyond that. But there's too few of them, and it's too expensive to run nodes. And as a consequence, the number of nodes being so small and the number of nodes that are trusted means that there is an unbelievable amount of control in the hands of a central organization to change Ethereum. And the thing that I think is true about that is that if you don't have a decentralized money, you don't have decentralized finance. So at the base of everything, you require to have a decentralized money. And the only one out there is Bitcoin.
That's interesting. And I saw like a lot of people posting run a node, including yourself on Twitter today. And like I've never thought about that. Like you say, nodes are like the protecting validators of everything. How does that work with like a miner? Do miners point at like a pool, then pools talk to nodes? How does all that? I have no idea
So
how that works.
so the all a miner needs, at least in a Bitcoin world. So I'm not as up to date on how all of the non-Bitcoin nodes fully work. I mean, I have a basic understanding of Ethereum, how they work, and I have a very high level understanding of what proof of stake is, um, and how it's going to work in the future. But I don't have the depth of knowledge of how they work compared to, say, Bitcoin. But in the Bitcoin world, what a Bitcoin miner needs is it needs the latest block that's available. And from that latest block, it will take a tiny portion of it called the hash of that block, and it will pass it into the next block that it's trying to find. So if it finds the next block, it takes that hash, uh, includes it in the things that it's trying to do to find the block, and then if it finds one, it sends it out. And that hash from the previous block is what links the next block to the previous block, thus creating a chain.
That makes a
Um,
lot of sense. That clicks with me.
right. So all a miner needs is the most recent block. Now, generally speaking, miners, I believe, will run the full node software, but they don't need it. And a miner can run any node software that they want. They can run whatever they want. They do whatever they want. And so if they run the node software that has a different set of rules than the majority of node operators accept, what will happen is a miner will produce a block that the majority of node operators will say is not a valid block. And when a miner does that, they lose that work. They don't get paid. They spent the electricity to produce that block, but they don't get paid for it.
That makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, and then I guess Ethereum. I've never tried to run a node, and I know you run your own Bitcoin node, correct?
Yeah, I actually, interestingly enough, so that computer back there, that is the one down there is my main full node, Bitcoin full node. And then I've got up there, I've got a tiny little Raspberry Pi 4 that's running a node as well.
So you
Um,
don't need that much equipment to run a Bitcoin
No,
node.
no, no. I mean, the computer that we're talking on right now is also running the Node software. It's Windows is running the Node software because I wanted to see whether or not I could do it. And honestly, it sits in the background and does nothing most of the time. Every 10 minutes or so, it validates a block and uses like 0.1% of a CPU, and then it goes back to sleep. Um, it takes up so few resources. So I installed it, synced the blockchain, and then forgot about it. And I've just left it running because I can.
And having your own node, that helps you with privacy of your own and security of
Yeah.
your
So
own transactions as well.
the most important thing for me to run a node, the reason that I want to run a node is because when I chose the software that I'm going to use to run my node, what I'm choosing are the set of rules that I consider to be the important rules for Bitcoin. The ones I could say I've chosen to use Bitcoin Core. Right now, there is a within the Bitcoin world, there is a nodes that are signaling support for Taproot and nodes that are not signaling support for Taproot.
That was my
So
next question.
so I've chosen a node that signals support for Taproot because I think Taproot is a really, really good thing. So by choosing the software, I decide for me what is considered to be a valid Bitcoin transaction. And then when I connect my wallet, the software wallet on my phone, when I connect everything that I do to that node, I know that my Bitcoin follows those rules. And
That
so that's an important portion of it for me.
that makes a lot of sense. So I guess what is Taproot? And then like with the red blocks and green blocks, does that mean there's like two separate Bitcoin chains? Like is that like a fork that has happened and we're saying all nodes are voting which fork is the correct fork for the future? What like I
So,
don't understand that.
what Taproot is a at a very, very high level. Taproot is a way of making multi-sig transactions much more invisible. So right now, when you have a multi-sig transaction or a multi-sig uh, wallet or whatever, um, it's visible on the blockchain. You can see the size of the address is significantly larger than the size of, say, a regular Bitcoin address. And so as a consequence, if you're running around doing scans of the blockchain, you can say, "Oh, hey, that looks like a multi-sig transaction." And in particular, if you find a 2 of 2 multi-sig transaction, that's almost certainly connected to the Lightning Network. So what Taproot does is it uses a different type of signature technology called Schnorr signatures that make it impossible to distinguish a regular Bitcoin transaction from a multi-sig transaction. And so what that does is it increases the privacy. So now no one can tell whether or not that multi-sig transaction is just a regular transaction or a Lightning node. No one can tell. And so that increases overall privacy for people that are using the network. And it's important to do that. I think that's a very important thing to do.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I don't know. It's very interesting with all the government regulation talk going on and the China information that came out. What do you think about that and China banning Bitcoin for like the 100th time?
Uh, I think that China is going to find. I think that what has happened there is that the miners have decided, okay, I guess we're moving out of China. So there's been a fire sale on the mining equipment that's trying to move out of China because they don't want the Chinese miners who have put a lot of money into that capital don't want to lose it. So they're trying to sell it before the Chinese government comes and confiscates it, which, like, I've noticed a bunch of people on the US side saying, I want to buy it. I'll buy that mining equipment. And now that's being applied to, there's a company called Great American Mining, and what they do is they take and build mining nodes that are set up next to flared gas um, oil. Uh, the oil producers in Texas, for example, they have it as the process of producing oil and refining oil. They come up with a bunch of byproducts that are economically um,
Nat
ineffective.
gas.
Yeah,
Yeah. We
economically
literally can't
to
we
ship.
we
They
can't collect it and store it fast enough.
Correct. Correct. We can't collect it. We can't store it. It's too expensive. They don't get enough out of it. So what they do is they flare it. They flare it into the air in a incredibly wasteful energy. They just blow and there's requirements that they do this because the natural gas is much more of a problem environmentally than the flared natural gas. So what Great American Mining is doing is they're saying, hey, we'll go in, we'll set up a mining rigs so that when you burn this gas, you'll actually be able to do some economic recovery from it. So it's energy that is like completely lost, would be completely wasted, would be not existent in the world, has found a use. Um, and my reaction to the whole Chinese mining thing is like having all of that mining equipment come available is a net positive. I couldn't care less what China decides to ban or not ban. I Bitcoin is going to survive any sort of state level attacks. Honestly, I think. Uh, Now I know you're a big fan of uh, what the Bitcoin community calls shitcoins. Um, but honestly, I think that the state sponsored attack is Ethereum. I think Ethereum is a state sponsored attack. It is a mechanism for convincing the world that this thing's just as good as Bitcoin, but it's centralized and the government can control it. And I think it is I personally think it is the state sponsored attack.
That's an interesting thought. I mean, I'm not going to say that hasn't crossed my mind in the past with how it came up and how it's organized, and there is a little bit of a centralization problem at the top of Ethereum with, the Ethereum organization and all that stuff that goes on. I'm interested with that. Like, so that is also one of my questions. I was listening to this other podcast from one of our favorites, and it was like the history on Satoshi Nakamoto a little bit, not like
Mhm.
who he is, but just like his communication. And they were talking about like, somebody had the keys to Bitcoin and the development. Like, how does something new get developed on Bitcoin, and who holds the keys today, and how is that decentralized for any network, really? I would assume.
So the process of adding something new directly to Bitcoin to the Bitcoin layer one um, blockchain, Taproot is an example of that, and it is hard. It is incredibly difficult. So right now, what they're doing, they're going through this thing. If you go to taproot.watch, it's a website. You'll see all of the blocks that have been produced that are signaling support for Taproot and the ones that are not signaling support for Taproot. But Taproot is one of those things that is everyone agrees. Like the amount of consensus around people who want to have Taproot is incredibly high, and it still is incredibly difficult to change the layer one blockchain. So what I would say is that changing Bitcoin itself is very difficult. Um, it doesn't happen. What the way that changes and DeFi and additional features come into Bitcoin isn't directly on the Bitcoin blockchain. And that's a bonus. That's a really, really good thing because the Bitcoin blockchain is meant for one and only one thing, and that is securing money, securing the base money. That's it. That's the only thing it's trying to do. Nothing else. Anything on top of that, if you want to do like decentralized exchanges, if you want to do things like uh, lending platforms, that's layer two. Do that on layer two. That, and there is nobody in the world that can prevent you from doing that at layer two. Bitcoin is permissionless. I can write a wallet if I so decided, and the Bitcoin network can't stop me as long as I follow the Bitcoin rules. Similarly, if I wanted to write an application on top of Bitcoin, there is nobody in the world that can stop me from doing it as long as I follow the Bitcoin rules. Nobody. And so when Vitalik came around, like trying to change Bitcoin and say, "Hey, I want to build in Turing complete scripts into the base layer of Bitcoin." Um, eh, the question that I don't understand why he didn't ask is, well, why not build on top of Bitcoin? No one can stop you from building it at layer two. But what he wanted to do was build it into the base level block, into the base level Bitcoin. And the Bitcoin community correctly said, no, no, that's a bad way to do this. And so what he then did was he turned around and he built Ethereum, and Ethereum has had enormous numbers of problems associated with too much stuff at the base layer, way too much stuff at the base layer. And I don't see that change. I don't see that getting better.
I mean, one of the things I noticed just to recently put out there with Ethereum that was a huge issue is like gas fees are high just in general. Like to do anything on Ethereum, it's 30 to $100. But in a
Yeah.
real time of need, like when you need decentralized, like if you want to work on a borrowing and lending platform and you want to be a lender and you want to have borrowers, you can't have what happened. Like you can have the 50% drawback in Ethereum and all that. That's fine. It's a they're volatile assets. I'm not worried about that. But the gas fees was straight extortion during that period. Like it went as high as like $1,500 to do a transaction. So if you were using DeFi and had taken a loan with Ethereum or Bitcoin or any collateral that wasn't just a stable dollar, you were basically being extorted at the bottom there. If you were anywhere near close to being liquidated, it cost you an extreme amount of money to save yourself, and
Yeah.
that's not operational in any, that's not going to help any individual. And then some of the arguments I hear about like maybe Ethereum will just be used by the big guys in Wall Street, it's like, well then what are we doing? Like the whole point of this was to be decentralized so that everybody has access. And then I guess that goes into like, so do you think we will see borrowing and lending platforms built on layer two with Bitcoin? And
Well,
will they
there
be
is already
decentralized?
one. There's one called Hodl that has I haven't used it. I have very little interest in any of that. But I know like there's a guy named Adam Back, and uh um he was one of the guys who was cited in the Bitcoin white paper. So this is one of the smartest people on the planet. And he posted using Hodl, and Hodl has a way of where I can offer a contract at a layer two, and then I basically show up into a market for loans and for lending and borrowing. I'm sorry, I'm saying the same thing for yeah, borrowing and lending for that kind of stuff. So I haven't used it. I don't really have a lot of desire for it. But I mean, I know it exists. And will it exist on higher levels? I do. I think that there will be decentralized finance based on Lightning. And if you've ever spent any time using Lightning, Lightning is transformative. I mean, it is unbelievable. So, like, I run a Lightning node and I get paid. And so, to the extent that I've got a well connected Lightning node, I get paid a few sats every so often just to transmit, to bypass transactions for people. And it's just sitting there doing nothing. I'm getting paid. And now it's not much, right? It's Satoshis, but those Satoshis, when Bitcoin hits like extreme value, are going to be valuable. So yeah, I think Lightning is going to be. I think when people get their head around how Lightning works and how incredible it is that I can send a transaction from here to Kathmandu in milliseconds with no government being able to stop me. That's I mean that's incredible. That is really really cool. But we don't have a ton of we have some liquidity in Lightning right now, but not enough for it to be really used that way. But it's growing, and it's the technology is incredibly cool.
And so the Lightning Network, that is a layer two that you think like all the Bitcoin decentralized finance will be built on top of, and that's built on top of the Bitcoin network. So any transactions you're doing in that layer two will also be, I guess, do they like batch to layer one or how
Yeah,
do?
that's what they do. They batch to layer one. So what I do in a Lightning, let's say I wanted to open up a Lightning connection on the Lightning network with you. What I would do is I would say, hey, I'm going to commit 500,000 sats to my end of the Lightning network, and then I can now send you 500,000 sats. And the Lightning network allows anybody you're connected to be able to be a recipient of that. So let's say that I want to send Poker Pastor 1,000 sats. I'm not connected to him, but you are. So I will send you 1,000 sats, and then you will send Poker Pastor 1,000 sats, and it's done in such a way that uh, you don't get the sats until you confirm that you've sent them to PokerPaster, right? It's this gigantic network that, and this happens in milliseconds. It's incredibly fast. So what happens is, the thing that establishes this is me agreeing to lock up 500,000 sats, and then at the end of it, when we close that channel, we settle down. We say, well, I sent 1,000 to PokerPaster. You sent 50 back to me. I sent, and we net that to one transaction that goes back on the blockchain when we decide we want to close that channel.
That makes sense. And will there be like third party node operators that do that? Like,
Yeah,
will
there already are. There
okay.
already are. There are some big node operators, Lightning node operators that already provide both. You can rent liquidity. So essentially, the way that that works is, so if I open up a channel with you and I commit 500,000 sats to it, what's going to happen is I can send um money out, but I can't get any back because there's nothing on your side until I first put something on your side. So there are these node operators that offer a service where they'll put money on the other side for a fee, or and it works like that. There's also something called looping, where I will send a Bitcoin transaction for say 100,000 sats, and then you'll put 100,000 sats into the Lightning channel so that we can exchange money back and forth, so I can receive money. And there's a bunch of different interesting ways in which to manage that. And that's probably that having to manage that is, I would guess, I don't know for sure, but is probably the reason why Lightning still doesn't have the growth that it needs yet, because that's still a lot of work, and that managing that is developing. Like a year ago, none of the looping, the pooling, none of that stuff existed. So it's growing, but it's growing at a slower pace than I think that a lot of the people in your shoes who are chasing yield and trying to use traditional finance techniques in the crypto space. It's probably going at a pace that's slower than you would like.
Absolutely, yeah, that's absolutely it. And I mean, it's just, Ethereum is a playground right now where all these yields can be had and all these very interesting protocols are being built. I wonder if it's like, do you think some of these, like already on Ethereum, you hear about these decentralized protocols talking about bridging to other chains and all these things. Do you see a future where people that have been developing on Ethereum, some of these decentralized protocols will bridge over and build on Bitcoin in the future? Is that what's coming basically, or?
I think they're going to not have any choice. Um, I, I because at the end of the day, one of the big comes out of Seyfedin Amusa's book, The Bitcoin Standard, is that the hardest money wins. And the hardest, it just consistently wins because human beings are searching for this thing that can't change. And when they find something that can't change, they use it to measure value. And it becomes this gigantic store of value. And if somebody comes along with a harder money, that will wreck the softer money. It will just absolutely wreck it because people will choose to put their value in the thing that's harder. And Bitcoin's the hardest money. It's just the hardest money. There's like nothing we've seen. We've gone through uh what is it, like 13 years now of Bitcoin being incredibly stable and rock solid and demonstrating through FUD attack after FUD attack, through actual attack after actual attack, that the money supply of Bitcoin is not changing. It just is not. And um, I don't think Ethereum can say that. I just don't think Ethereum has any credible way of saying that its money supply is solid. They're
They're
trying
changing it
to
as we speak.
they're changing it as we speak. And so what does that mean for the future? Are they going to change it in the future too? I mean, they have no credibility there in terms of like credible hard money supply. And so I don't think that I think that Bitcoin is going to be the hardest money. And so at the end of the day, Bitcoin is going to wreck all of these other things. It's just going to wreck them. And it may in the short term, in between now and say, I don't know how many years ahead. I'd like to say 5 years ahead, but I have no idea. I don't know what the time frame is. But at some point, they're going to get wrecked. And so gamble between then and now. Have a good time. I played poker for years. I, I don't have no problem with gambling, but it is a gamble, and you will eventually get wrecked, in my opinion.
That makes, I mean, it makes sense the way you come at it. I also, going into all that, like going back to some of the podcasts I've listened to and doing some more research after our talks, like your thoughts on the history of Bitcoin in the early days and the attack that did happen, and like how does that all fit into the security and future proofability of Bitcoin in your mind, and that things like that can't happen again and stuff like that. I know it's happened to
So
every network.
the main attack that you're thinking of may be a different attack than I'm thinking of. Which attack are you thinking of?
I guess I keep hearing about one like in the early days of Bitcoin where somebody actually did a double spend and they had to like pause the network for a moment and
Okay,
fix some things.
so that was so the thing that you're thinking of is I think you're thinking of the time when this is like so in Bitcoin's 13-year history, it has a like 99.99 something uptime.
Hmm.
Well, that differential is when somebody figured out a defect in the code and issued like a billion Bitcoin and was able to figure out how to do an issue of 1 billion Bitcoin. And so that was the only time in Bitcoin's history that the network was down. And it was really, really early on. Since then, it hasn't been down at all. The attack that I'm thinking of was the one where the Bitcoin Cash folks tried to change the block size. And by trying to change the block size, they were I tend to think that they were intentional about it, but I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and say that maybe they just didn't know what they were doing. But the consequence of changing the block size was to make it significantly harder to run a node. And by making it significantly harder to run a node, they're attacking the Bitcoin network. They're attacking and saying, "Look, we want more centralization." And that's an attack. There's no other way to describe that other than an attack. I don't think they thought they were attacking the network. I thought they thought that they were trying to make the network have more transactions. But even if you quadruple the size of the Bitcoin network, that's not enough transactions. It's not enough. You go from 7 transactions to 30. That's not enough transactions per second, I mean. Um, so the cost of dramatically centralizing the network wasn't worth the benefit. What we really need to make transaction volume is something on top of Bitcoin, and Lightning is one of those things. Lightning Network is one of those things. Visa sitting on top of Bitcoin is another one. There's nothing that keeps you from having Visa do all of their back end settlement through Bitcoin. Nothing. So uh, the way to scale the Bitcoin network, the scaling debate, the scaling what I consider to be a scaling attack was layers, layered money, basically doing everything in layers.
Now, doesn't that become centralized though if you're still using Visa, but you're settling in Bitcoin? Like, isn't Visa just a centralized layer on top of Bitcoin then?
So Visa, well, no, I mean, sure, yeah, I mean, you could say that Visa is a centralized layer on top of Bitcoin, but there's lots of Visas. Visa isn't the only option. If Visa is what's convenient for you, then fine, you can choose to use Visa if you want. The problem with Visa is that right now its primary money is a centralized money, which is the dollar. And so in order for Visa to comply with the US dollar centralization, it has to follow an enormous number of government rules that the government basically says, hey, if you're going to do any sort of dollarization, any use of this dollar, we're going to impose these rules. And we saw an example of that on Black Friday in the poker world, where prior to April 15th, 2011, I think it was, you could send Visa transactions to poker sites. You could easily send it from the US. And then on April 15th, all of that got shut down. You couldn't get money in and out of poker sites. You couldn't get checks from poker sites. You could no longer participate in that because the government suddenly deemed these sites are not things that we want to happen. And Visa had to comply. They didn't have any choice but to comply. So Visa is the only reason Visa is centralized is because its underlying money is centralized. So that goes back to the point I was trying to make with Ethereum earlier. If you have an underlying centralized money, you cannot have decentralized finance. That's the way the world is right now. We have a centralized currency of the US dollar. You have centralized finance on top of it. We could have decentralized finance if we had decentralized money. We could have Visa, we could have MasterCard, we could have JP Morgan, we could have all of these things are completely separate entities. And we would have a decentralized finance today, except for that we have a centralized money.
That kind of makes sense. And like, so if somebody wants to build decentralized finance on top of like layering two on Bitcoin, would they need like nodes to then run that layer? And how does it scale up transactions just because you have a whole bunch of separate chains decentralized?
Probably, well, you could do it with, so like Liquid is a layer 2 network on top of Bitcoin as well. And Liquid does it through a quasi, it's not really decentralized at all. They have this quorum of 15 companies that essentially decide how things work in Liquid. But do I care? Not at all. I don't care at all. I care that there's competition. I care that as I want to do have transactions, I can choose which one I'm going to evaluate and use. Lightning right now is a completely open, and there is zero centralization in Lightning. So that's a nice option, but it's got some complexities around with it, associated with it. Liquid is a whole lot easier to understand, but it's centralized. So in that choice of what am I going to use, I get to make a decision independent of any of the rest of you. The rest of you could do whatever you want. I couldn't care less. I choose for me what the trade off is. Do I want to be more decentralized? Do I want to have it easier? That's my choice. And to me, that's the ultimate scenario, that each individual gets to choose for them what scenario matches them best. And um, Bitcoin as a underlying decentralized currency increases everybody's choice there. It makes it gives you ultimate decentralization because the currency is decentralized.
That makes sense. And so, like with Ethereum, you see all these like DeFi protocols, as they're called. I like to just call them businesses. And the gamifying of these tokens, which I also like to call like stock or equities at this point, some of them spit off dividends and things like that. And you kind of see how on Ethereum, like a lot of these things do have centralized governance, even the protocols,
Mhm.
because of like the large bag holders of the tokens from whatever it was. Maybe it was a pre-mine, maybe it was the ICO days, even if it's, the newer token farming that's going on, liquidity mining and all that stuff. You see that there are big players that are scooping up. Like I've started to vote in some of these governance things, and I look at how the voting's happening, and it's like, oh, there was a massive VC who voted with enough money in this thing that they cancel out my vote and the other 1,000 people that are on this protocol anyway. So, like, why am I even what's my vote even really do here, and how decentralized are we? Do you see kind of like, I guess, like, will there be like investing in layer 2 protocols on Bitcoin, and do you see that more of like a traditional route or a token route, or like will it just be?
So so there's the two answers that I have to that is we're still early. The first answer is we're still really early. And building something out decentralized that's actually decentralized is hard and it's going to take time. Um the second answer to that is that part of the reason that we have some of the level of financial complication we have in the world right now is because everyone and their brother is chasing yield. They have to because the underlying currency is inflating away. Their ice cube is melting a little bit every day. In order for them to preserve the wealth that they've put into their ice cube, they have to chase something riskier and riskier, take riskier and riskier bets in order to preserve their the capital stock that they've built. In a world of Bitcoin where that is not the case, where you can't inflate away Bitcoin, the number of people who are going to chase gigantic yields is probably going to decrease significantly. So I suspect, although I don't know for sure, I suspect that we won't have everyone needing to be chasing uh doing stock market analysis, doing things like where they're looking for this crazy yield. I think that if you get a currency that is not inflationary and increases its purchasing power slowly over time. Right now, the purchasing power of Bitcoin is incredibly volatile because we're coming into a point where we don't know. The world isn't quite sure that it is a money yet. And as they learn that becomes a money, it will stable out, but its purchasing power will still slowly increase forever because there's only 21 million of them. And as we gain productivity, as we get better at doing things, each unit of those 21 million things, each satoshi becomes more valuable because it reflects the productivity of the human endeavor. Um, and so when people find that just saving money is enough to increase their purchasing power, they won't need to do some of the complicated financial stuff that we do right now in the world. The vast majority won't. Some still will. There will still be casinos. There will still be gambling. That people will still pursue that, just at a significantly smaller level than we do today. So the answer to your question is, will DeFi come? Yeah. Will it be what we see in current levels of financialization? I don't think so. But I'm guessing at the future. I have no idea. Everything that should be a gigantic caveat of everything here. All
This
of
is
this is
not
at
financial
best.
advice.
All of this is at best a gigantic guess. You
Absolutely, man.
you play your cards as you
You
see
put
fit.
it you put it very eloquently, and it does make sense. So, I
Rob
do.
Rob had a question. He said, with other cryptos loosely tied to Bitcoin, how do other coins benefit during the halvening? Is there more upside to other coins close to that, and then taking those profits into Bitcoin? I think my answer to that question is that I think that people are aligned with chasing yield because our current financial system pushes them towards that. And so everybody is looking for the next Bitcoin. Everybody is looking for the next thing that will beat whatever because they have to chase um get something that beats inflation. They have to. Nobody cannot do that. And so I think we are in a mindset where what we're doing is looking for, well, what could be the next Bitcoin? And I think that you'll notice that whenever Bitcoin gigantically spikes, everything else comes along. When Bitcoin gigantically dumps, everything else comes along. The idea that the price of altcoins is decorrelated from Bitcoin, I don't see evidence for that. So I think that what you're seeing with those other coins is people sort of coattailing on Bitcoin. Is there opportunity to make money doing that? Hell yeah, there is. I'm not smart enough to do it. I have no idea. Like Rand, I watch you do some of the analysis that you do, and I'm like, man, you have dedicated your life full time to this. I I just don't think I'm smart enough to capture that, and so I don't play those games. I'm not interested, but people can. It is certainly worthwhile to try and capture that. But at the end of the day, what you're trying to do is increase your Bitcoin, or what I would be trying to do is increase my Bitcoin stack. And because I am convinced that Bitcoin is really the ultimate money for the entire world. And uh, I don't want to get wrecked like having some portion of it in Ethereum the minute before I become the bag holder. Right. I just don't want to be that guy.
I'll tell you what, it was really painful, and yeah, that was Poker Pastor was a great question there. And I also like the saying that's kind of going around is like 21 million of all the things.
Yeah.
Me,
21 million divided, or infinity divided by 21 million. Yeah.
yeah, so like I guess we do have a long way to go. If 21 million is supposed to pay for all the things in the world and all the services, there's a lot of growth left in there, I guess.
Right. So if you think about the total value of the world, like of the known world that we are aware of, it's somewhere around the 300 to 400 trillion dollars. Well, 300 to 400 trillion dollars is I believe it's like a $50 million Bitcoin price. So we got a long way to go. We've got a long way to go. And the big Rodney is right. There are lost Bitcoins. There are lost Bitcoins. And so it's really, um, uh, um, you know, infinity divided by 18 million, or whatever the actual number is. But the big problem with the lost Bitcoins is, the people who had them might find them. There's really a relatively small number that are provably destroyed. So you can send Bitcoin to an address that there that was built for the purpose of not having a private key. So if you send Bitcoin there, it's destroyed. It's gone. There's no way of unlocking that transaction. But that's a relatively small number. I like to think of it as just 21 million because it's easier. But the actual number is less. What that
Do,
number is, I don't know that I know.
do you think that like some of those private wallets will eventually get cracked that are just sitting there that haven't been touched in so long, or do you ever
I
see
don't
a day where that comes
I
back into
don't think the
circulation?
well, if they do get cracked, we're in trouble. That's trouble. That's bad news because the essentially if they can crack one wallet, they can crack mine, and I'm not happy with that.
that makes that makes complete sense. Do you ever see a point in time like as people lose and forget about Bitcoin, does it ever become an issue, or we just add decimal places and who cares?
Yeah, what like within Lightning Network right now, we already have sub satoshis. So you
But
can
what?
pay somebody yeah, within Lightning Network, you can pay somebody less than a satoshi. But you can only settle back to the chain in satoshis.
So really the numbers arbitrary. Like as the value goes up and Bitcoin gets lost, we just, move on down the chain and it's just literally a ledger that we've all agreed stores wealth and the numbers
Correct.
don't really matter.
Well, correct. At some point, what will happen is people will stop measuring the price of Bitcoin in dollars and start measuring the price of everything else in Bitcoin, right? Because it'll be meaningless. The dollars will be like, I don't see any way out of the inflationary cycle that we're in dollars, right? If the government stops printing, we have all kinds of macroeconomic consequences to that, and uh, you know, uh, uh, entire industries are destroyed, right? Because like the U.S. government, if they stop printing, how do they pay back their debt to China? Do wars start because we can't pay back the amount we promised to pay back to foreign other countries in the world, right? They can't stop printing because they can't stop printing. The value of Bitcoin is just going to keep going up in dollar terms. But at some point, hyperinflation happens, Zimbabwe-esque type, Weimar Republic type stuff happens, and we stop measuring stuff in dollars because it's meaningless. It just, you know, okay, the value of a Bitcoin is $100 trillion. Who cares? Like the value of $1 is it's worth more. The paper is worth more than the actual purchasing power.
That makes a lot of sense. And like, do you think? Let's see what Poker Pastor says here. With how easy it is to build a node, could someone create a DDoS-esque type attack where they spam tons of nodes to fake results?
So
That's a great question.
theoretically, yes, but in practicality, no. There's a really great article. Oh God, I'm forgetting who wrote it right now. It might have been Gigi. There's this guy on Twitter named Gigi. He's a genius level. There are some people in the Bitcoin space that are so freaking smart. I don't know how they can assimilate that much intelligence. I don't understand how it's possible. But anyway, I don't remember who wrote it, but there's a node is important, but way, 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 way more important is a node that has economic value attached to it. So, for example, I have 3 nodes sitting here. Only one of them has economic value attached to it. As a consequence of that, the only thing that I am going to actually care about being correct is the one that has my Bitcoin tied to it. The rest of them, whatever. I can kind of ignore them. And so if you were to spin up, say, 10 million nodes on AWS, their value is substantially less than the value of the people who actually hold Bitcoin on those nodes. The people who actually hold Bitcoin are going to enforce the rules much more staunchly than the people who don't on those nodes. And so as a consequence, yeah, you can do this, but it has the value of each additional node that doesn't have economic value tied to it diminishes dramatically. And so it doesn't matter. The real nodes, the nodes that are have much more importance are the ones that have actual economic value associated with them.
This sounds like proof of stake to me. What's going on
Uh,
here?
so you're confusing two things. Proof of stake is a way to produce new coins, is a way to produce blocks and associated new coins. What I'm talking about is a staking that validates the network, that validates the blocks and validates the transactions. So yeah, there is some level of staking in Bitcoin, in that the nodes are who decide what the rules are. And if you have a stake on those nodes, you get disproportionate amount of say in what defines a valid transaction. That said, um, that said, uh, like the miners still have to do the work regardless of their stake size to produce a block. They can't not do the work. They can't just say, well, I have 60% of the Bitcoin. Let's do some hypothetical. I have 60% of the Bitcoin. Therefore, that gives me a 60% chance of producing the next block without doing any work. Nope. They still have to do the work. They still have to expend the electricity, and they still have to produce a valid block. They still have to tie a block in the virtual world to real world resources, which is the electricity used to spend that, to produce that block. So, yes, on the way that you're talking about it, it does sound a little bit like staking, but it's not. You're staking is the mechanism by which you produce blocks rather than the mechanism by which you validate them. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. And if you're staking on a node to validate, are you receiving any type of like compensation for the work done
Nope.
by the node?
Nope, not at all. All I'm doing is I'm saying this is a valid block, this is not a valid block.
And you're
And
trusted because of the monetary.
well, no, but I'm not trusted. Nobody's trusted. If let's say I put my Bitcoin, tie it to a Bitcoin Cash type node that is almost but not quite the same as a Bitcoin node. If I produce a transaction, produce or forward a block, or forward a transaction that doesn't match all of the rest of the nodes, what is actual Bitcoin, the rest of the Bitcoin network will kick me off the network, right? So while I have some stake in there, my stake is only usable and only maintainable if I actually follow the rules.
That's a pretty strong like gamification to want to follow the rules there.
Yes, it is. Yes,
Po-
it is.
Poker Pastor, he says one last question. I hope not. And if anybody else wants to ask questions, fire away, including Poker Pastor. Keep firing. What's your best guess for how U.S. regulation would affect the system? While they can't touch your BTC, they can disrupt services. Does the international BTC pool have enough weight you think it won't matter? Would a US ban accelerate a move to Europe for you?
Um, so in the Bitcoin space, you'll often hear people talk about um, a tragic boating accident. And that is a where people say, like, I was in a boat and I lost my hardware wallet and it's down at the bottom of Lake Michigan and I can't get my hardware. My Bitcoin's lost. And the problem with that is incredibly difficult for any government to prove that's true or false. Like, I can say what the government can say is I have purchased Bitcoin. They know because I purchased it through a an exchange that they have access to, and that exchange is tied to the U.S. financial system. So therefore, it has to follow the U.S. financial rules. And one of those rules is that the exchange has to tell the government when I've purchased Bitcoin, right? Um, so they know that I've purchased Bitcoin. What they can't ever know is whether or not I've lost my Bitcoin, spent my Bitcoin, moved it around. They can't know that. They can have clues and hints into it because they can examine uh look at the blockchain and they can say, "Oh, this particular Bitcoin that Mark purchased moved to this other place over here." But they don't know what that other place over there is because it was just conjured out of a computer out of thin air as some random thing, and they don't know what that is. So um so they can regulate the on and off ramps. They have demonstrated that they can regulate the on and off ramps, but that's about the extent of what they can do. Beyond that, I'm not really worried about it in the U.S. at least. The United States has a First Amendment that we guard fairly tightly. Not as tight as I'd like, but we have a Supreme Court case saying that encryption is speech. And as a consequence, I feel fairly comfortable, although I am, as Jay Smith keeps on reminding me, I'm not a lawyer. Um, so, uh, um, so I don't know this for a fact, but in my own head, I feel fairly confident that we have some sort of legal protection against the imposition of some rules that would prevent me from speaking through Bitcoin. It some of these regulations would be a violation of my First Amendment rights, and so do I know? I don't know. Just remember, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a financial advisor. I'm just some nerd who likes Bitcoin.
Absolutely. This is not financial advice. This is just two people enjoying a conversation, learning from each other a little bit. And you may, if you learn something from it and do your own research, that's on you, you know?
Yeah, but in answer to the other question, there is a service by a woman called Katie the Russian where she helps you get secondary passports to countries that um don't do some aren't trying to do some of the things the US government is trying to do. I mean, the US government has a huge incentive to try and not make Bitcoin become a thing. And that incentive is because of the petrodollar system. The the government the US government enjoys an enormous amount of power because um they have made a rule that said, or they've made an agreement with Saudi Arabia that says um Saudi Arabia is only going to sell oil for US dollars, and that creates an artificial demand for US dollars. in exchange, the US protects Saudi Arabian interests and allows Saudi Arabia to do an enormous number of things that it wouldn't be able to get away with otherwise. So the US has an incentive to keep that system alive.
Do you think like one thing that scares me is everybody always says the IRS, like with them, it's you're guilty until you prove innocence. Does that scare you that the IRS might just send you a bill one day and be like, "Well, you got to prove you didn't. You don't owe this."
Well, so right now I'm not spending Bitcoin.
So it doesn't
Um,
matter.
so according to the current US rules, it doesn't matter. According to, if the government gets some of these wealth taxes in place that they want to get in place, then I don't know. I mean, that would be something that would be a bridge I cross when we get to it. I don't know the answer to that. As far as like complying with the government rules, I try as hard as I possibly can to comply with every rule that I am aware of to every extent that I can, because I am not interested in like making an enemy of the US federal government. That seems like a really bad plan.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's why I just, pay the taxes on all of it, let it happen. It is what it is. But you do hear from a lot of people like moving to Puerto Rico or like moving to Florida or the state of Wyoming and things like that. Do you think there's going to be a lot of moving around and shifting like that in the future for just better tax
Oh, I
regulations?
yeah, I do, and you already see some states like Kentucky, for example, put together some incentives to draw minors to Kentucky. So they put some tax packages that say, hey, if you want to come mine in Kentucky, we'll give you some favorable reasons to do that.
What?
So there is going to be um, uh, government competition for Bitcoiners. Texas and Florida are right now sort of leading the way. Actually, honestly, Oregon is leading the way. Oregon, through Caitlin Long, has put together a huge number of really, really good laws in place that protect cryptocurrency and Bitcoin in particular. And have a feeling that Oregon will become the new Delaware, right? Where every financial institution runs out of Delaware, right? Because the laws there are beneficial to them. I think that Oregon's going to become the new Bitcoin sort of center of the world. Although Texas is making a real play for it because their scenario or situations in Texas are much more favorable. And Texas has a bunch of oil that can be used for mining, right? Um, who knows? There's definitely going to be regulatory arbitrage, right?
I'm 15 minutes from Kentucky popped into my head. I know people
Hmm.
that own farms in Kentucky that are just hay fields. Like what do we got to do here?
Yeah, and I mean that's the cool thing. If you live in Kentucky, and Kentucky, I don't know what the wind um environment is around Kentucky, but Bitcoin is going to consume any extra available energy and turn it into money. Like, so if wind is really good in Kentucky, stick up a windmill, even if it's not running all the time. Whenever it is running, whenever the wind's blowing, you're generating money.
That's
I
gonna
don't
be
see I don't see how Bitcoin doesn't just like Bitcoin is going to convert like all of the things that right now these energy sources like wind and solar and all of these really, really green energy sources, Bitcoin's going to be the driver that makes them much more efficient long term, because you can consume that energy now, whereas the regular electrical grid can't, because wind and solar produce energy at peak when the peak time demand for energy isn't there, right? So the peak production for wind and solar is at a different time than the peak consumption. And so you end up wasting all this energy and it ends up becoming useless. But now Bitcoin can consume that. Now there's economic incentive to start developing and figuring out how to make wind and solar much more usable, much more reliable, much more available, much cheaper, right? So, like, all of this energy FUD is FUD. It's crap. It's and Elon is he is a slave to the government, his government overseers. He's just a slave to them. And as a consequence, um he is spouting FUD. He is just spouting FUD. I could not care less what Elon thinks. At the end of the
Absolutely.
day, Bitcoin is going to drive innovation in the energy market, and Elon can be a part of that or not. I don't care.
Absolutely, and you can see it already with the, like you're saying, the off gassing and flaring in the oil market, and you can even tell the miners in China, they literally pick up and shift regions to get cheaper hydropower. So
Yeah.
there's like a season where you can mine more Bitcoin in America because of all of them moving in China. So you can see that greenification's coming, and like that is definitely just
Yeah, so like
noise.
the image that I like about that is that Bitcoin is like this water that covers the energy world. It will flow to the lowest points and even out the surface, because Bitcoin will find all of the energy that is currently trapped and not usable and use it.
It makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense. Why moving to Puerto Rico is a thing. We're still under federal government. I think there are some like some different tax laws down there. And if you live 6 months, I'm not a professional. You have to ask your accountant on
Yeah,
that one.
actually, I've looked into moving to Puerto Rico because Puerto Rico doesn't have any representation in Congress. They have somebody who sits there, but they don't have representatives. So as a consequence, the federal, one of the founding principles of the U.S. is no taxation without representation, which means that in Puerto Rico, there's no federal income tax. So that's attractive, and you're still a U.S. citizen, right?
You still get to keep a U.S. passport, huh?
Yeah, but the big problem is that you still owe tax on any income and any stuff that you derived outside of Puerto Rico. So, you don't, it's not a free pass, but it's better.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense.
Well, I have to go because I actually took an hour out of the workday to be able to do this, and I have meetings scheduled.
I
Is
really
there anything
appreciate the time.
anything else that we want to cover? So, like in the last minute before I go,
Where can everybody find you?
twitter.com/1dullgeek. I'll put a link up here.
Absolutely, and we'll slap this on the YouTube. And I really appreciate you giving us an hour on your birthday and in the middle of the workday, man. I learned a lot today, as always, and we'll have to do this again in the future.
Well, this was less of a debate and more of a discussion, which was what I was really, really hoping for.
Yeah,
So,
I don't know what I'm doing.
yeah. All right, man.
have a
Thanks for the time.
have a good one, buddy.
Yep. Bye.
See ya. That was an amazing interview, chat. I had a really good one with that. I learned a lot there. Apparently, I need to spin up a Bitcoin node and play around with that. I'm really interested for the Bitcoin conference and learning a bunch about the mining, and a lot of the things that 1dullgeek brought up there are in the talks that are going to be at the Bitcoin conference in a few weeks. So I'm really interested to hear all that out and then maybe have another talk again in the future. Socials, let me put it up there. You'll be able to find this on YouTube. Please, if you're watching on YouTube, if you just got here, take a second, hit the subscribe button, hit the thumbs up, leave a comment. It really helps us out. If you're here in Twitch watching this live, do the same, hit the follow. Thank you for watching the YouTube videos. We really appreciate it. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up button, subscribe, comment down below, help us out with the YouTube algorithms. And we're live 5 days a week on Twitch, 7 a.m. to 2 p.m. EST. Come check us out. Thanks for watching.